disclaimer, we're recording kind of a different way here. We have audio problems, but we're not going to let that stop the interview from happening. So if the audio's bad on one side, we're still going to get the interview in. Good deal. So the last interview we had was for me, it was a way to bring information to people that they seriously they were completely unaware of where we were going with TCPA rulings and how it's hitting, the insurance industry especially. Just a reminder, financial services is where you would generalize what I do, whether it's marketing or sales calls, and insurance and financial planning kind of rolled into the service. But many people, many agents specifically, were unaware of all this going on, and that interview we did prior was sort of a first mention for many people. To make you look good here, Eric, I do like I always do. I write a little quick bio. I'm going to read. This is a bio I write about you. See if you frown or smile as I read this. This is always fun for me. So, back with us today is Eric Troutman, the legal powerhouse known as the Czar of the TCPA world. Partner at Troutman Amin, LLP, with a resume that boasts leading over 70 TCPA class actions and litigating nearly 1,000 individual cases as strategic counsel for major banks and financial giants. He is the brains behind TCPAWorld, a must-read hub for telecom law insights, and a go-to advocate before the FCC. Since we last spoke, which was March of 2024, Eric has been in the middle of it all, tracking the case, and I'm going to get into this, tracking the case of Assurance IQ's $21.875 million TCPA settlement and later the shutdown. Eric has a stance in the pushback against the one-to-one consent rule. But that's a major topic, so I want to get your stance on that one-to-one consent rule and how it was vacated, and racking up wins like defeating class certification in a major TCPA case just this month. I know no details of it, but from what I read today, it appears you're still winning. He is the founder and president of Reach, a prolific speaker, blogger, and a host of Unprecedented, the podcast. From his base in Irvine, California, he has been hailed a world-class courtroom advocate by his peers and recently spotlighted at the 2024 TAD Summit, alongside with CEO of UMail as part of what they're calling the Robocalling Dream Team. Whether it's decoding FCC rulings, battling robocall scammers, or just having fun along the way, Eric is here to unpack the wild ride of 2025's TCPA landscape. Welcome back, Eric.
Paul,
a lot of writing.
That was a hell of an intro.
That's my fun. But it's good. No, look, I've been looking forward to this since we decided to do this, because information coming from you is what we consider the trusted source. You're a face they all should recognize when it comes to TCPA. And what I want to specifically get your mind focused on today is not just agents. I really want to tailor this to the insurance space, just like last time. 4 entities, 4 different levels, 4 different perspectives. The agents and brokers, the IMOs and agencies, the carriers at that level, and of course the lead sellers. So we'll go at it with those 4. I sent out an email basically putting out the opportunity for those in the list to submit some questions, like what question could you have for Eric? How is this, how's this interview, how would it help you? What are your questions? And you know what's overwhelmingly the response to deal with aged leads. No, we're talking about insurance, and so quite well the aged lead market is huge for many entities. The agents who call them, as well as the specifically the IMOs who sell them. A lot of the IMOs who sell leads to their agents, their huge revenue source is the aged lead. Reselling the data, and it go in perpetuity, I say, right? If you look at my content, I'm always mentioning that they sell it in perpetuity. The latest content I put out has been recording the insurance telemarketing calls that I receive. Myself, I'm licensed in all of it. No matter how many times you tell them if I want something, I'll write myself. It continues and it continues, and I noticed that when I started answering them, the volume increased. There's something to answering that I say gets you escalated in their, they flag you in some kind of way. This person answers the phone, so the volume went up on me. It's been fun to make this discovery, but particularly, let's start with age leads. You see if any perspective you have on it has changed since the last conversation, because the big event in between then and now, the 11th Circuit Court vacating that for us. What is your take on that?
Yeah, so everyone hopefully remembers that the FCC had put together a ruling that required before you could sell a lead, it had to have the name of only one seller, a supplier of good or service that the consumer was going to select before that lead was sold. And we were calling that the one-to-one rule. It also had to be logically and topically related, the consent to the transaction that led to the consent. So you couldn't sell, solar to a consumer who had tried to find out about a mortgage, let's say. So this was going to go forward, and Reach, actually adopted that standard and viewed one-to-one directionally as the right thing. I think everyone had concerns, me as much as anyone else, about the way it was written, about the scope of the rule and how it was going to apply, particularly to small business. And there was definitely some things that should have been fixed, but directionally, I think Reach's position was this was good. It would drive up the cost of leads to some degree, but the leads would be more valuable. CPA should stay about the same. And most importantly, the number of unwanted phone calls would go down. And that was what the commission was after. So we viewed this as, again, directionally a good thing. It was going to be very challenging for a lot of companies. It was going to have some pretty dire impacts, but directionally it was a good thing. It was challenged by a trade organization, not Reach, a different trade organization, to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal. At the same time, Reach was asking the FCC to give industry additional time. The two events kind of collided at the same time, and the ruling was set to go into effect on January 27th, 2025. That was a Monday. On January 24th, the Friday before the Monday, at 4:35 p.m., we received a ruling from the FCC that they were going to stay enforcement and effectiveness of the one-to-one rule. And 20 minutes later, at 4:55 p.m. Eastern, on the day before the rule was set to go into effect, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal comes out and strikes down the rule completely, which was a very unlikely event, very unlikely. And the ruling is a phenomenally interesting ruling for those of you who are attorneys and who are interested in kind of understanding how the law works. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeal basically turned everything that we knew about how agency actions to be interpreted and just kind of flipped it on its head, and essentially said, no agency, you have no power to issue rules that conflict in any way with how the courts have interpreted terms. And it's fascinating because that is literally the exact opposite of the way most courts have looked at the issue. But there had been some changes in the law, right? The something called Chevron deference has gone away. And as a result, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal felt free to do what it otherwise probably would not have done. Now, since that ruling came out on January 24th, a couple of interesting things have happened. A couple of very big trade organizations on the consumer side, particularly the NCLC, the National Consumer Law Center, have tried to come into the lawsuit and tried to get the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal to overturn itself by getting more judges involved. Very interesting. Very unlikely for them to win this. However, 28 state AGs, attorneys general of all these 28 states, have come in and submitted a brief saying, yeah, we agree, 11th Circuit, you should reverse yourself. So it's
I didn't know about any of this, by the way.
Yeah, this is all that's on TCPAWorld. You got to follow TCPAWorld.com, baby. And so this is happening right now in real time. I do not expect that the 11th Circuit will reverse itself, but it's just interesting that they are being asked to do so right now. So that is the saga of one-to-one. So where does that leave us with aged leads, right? Aged leads today just like age leads yesterday, are very dangerous. They are, in my opinion, not something that anyone should be dabbling with. You should not take on risk. If you're buying age leads, you're not buying a prospect. You're not buying somebody who's actually interested in your product. You're just buying someone who's probably going to sue you for your call. Now, if it is a real consumer who really gave consent and your name is on the form and they haven't revoked the consent, is it technically legal? Probably. But I'm telling you, it's going to lead to a lawsuit. It so often does, right? Now, the good news is that today, if you want to buy an age lead, even though I just told you probably shouldn't, you can, right? There's at least a lane for those things to be legal, right? If all the boxes are checked and it's done right. Had the one-to-one rule come in, age leads would effectively be dead unless you just happen to be the one company that was named on a single entity form, but single entity forms don't exist, right? So essentially the concept of an age lead would have been dead had one-to-one become effective. But because it's not, you've got an opportunity, if you want to call it an opportunity, to buy yourself some risk and get yourself some age leads.
Is this manually dialed? This is where a lot of it comes in. I wrote down a sample question over here because this is where a lot of agents have questions. If I'm just manually dialing someone, am I ever at risk? Because, I'm not using the automated technologies, and the TCPA law specifically lists the AI voices, the automated dialers, and the other pre-recorded voices, right? So long as you're not doing one of those three manually dialing, how does that play in?
Yeah, so if you're manually dialing, and you're picking up a phone and you're using your finger, you're calling 10 digits, you're making a call, then these rules don't apply to you. If you are doing that, then the only rule that matters is the DNC, right? You cannot even call manually to a number on the national DNC list or to a state DNC list or to your own internal DNC list, which, by the way, you have to maintain. You cannot even manually call those numbers for marketing purposes unless you have prior express invitation or permission. But you wouldn't have had to comply with the one-to-one requirement to make those calls. So there were, a number of companies I know that had, just millions of numbers in their contact database, and they didn't want to just delete them all, but they didn't have one-to-one consent for them either, because these are purchased third-party leads in many instances. And so they were looking to go to a manual solution to kind of make these outbound calls. But with one-to-one going away, there's less concern about that.
Right, so long as you're not dropping them in that auto dialer and it's spitting out all these phone calls, and I've got my opinions on that. I'll share that in a second too, because that's going to come in when I talk about my recordings. If I'm manually dialing, do I have anything to worry about? That's kind of
the answer is yes. You have to worry about the DNC, right? You always have to worry about that DNC, and I'm telling you, at least half the cases I see are DNC cases, right? People are still they love to bring those cases because 70% of people are on that DNC list, right? So you got to be real careful. Just because you're manually dialing doesn't mean you're safe.
Got it. And so that obviously would apply to age leads, especially. Now, what qualifies as the proper consent? If I'm calling someone and they're on DNC, but they've given consent, what record? How do I need to show that?
Yeah, so if they're on the DNC, right, then you have to have what's called prior express invitation or permission. That has to be to your company, right?
Okay,
so if you're,
right.
Bob's independent agency, Bob's independent agency has to be on the form, right? Like you have to be the company that was asked to contact.
You have to have that copy? So you have to be able to show that copy, right?
You got to have something. Yeah, and if you're buying a third-party age lead, you got to have the TRNIA, the trusted prospect, trusted form, right? You got to have something in your possession that you'll be able to prove, hey, look, this is valid consent, right? Yeah. And, many times you're going to want to, of course, have consent come in first party, right, on your own website or on a form that, somebody comes into your office and fills out a form and gives you their phone number or something. I'm not sure if that happens anymore these days, but, whatever your process is to obtain leads, you're going to want to make sure that, these people are providing you with an inquiry, if not with prior invitation or permission to make those outbound calls.
And this is only if it's on DNC. If they're not on the DNC list, you can just, with the way the rules are now, what the laws are now, you can just call away manually. But
that is true.
You just can't catch someone on that DNC list. And if you do, you have to be able to prove that you have that consent in place. For us, and I think this is probably the most common, is having the lead form they filled out and the box is checked. By submitting this form, I'm checking this box saying that I consent to being contacted. Now, is there any expiration to a consent?
If it is a full prior express written consent, right, that complies with the full requirements of 47 CFR 64-1200 F9, which is the full definition of prior express written consent, which is 9 different things. We call it the Troutman 9 that it has to have. That consent does not expire. It does not expire.
Okay.
Now, if you have something less, like an oral statement of, hey, you can call me. I want to hear from you. I'm interested. Then that's not going to give you consent to use regulated technology, but that will give you consent to call a number on the DNC list, but only for 90 days.
90 days. Is that something new? Is that
No,
90 days? Is that it?
That's been the rule forever.
The
Yeah,
90
that's
days?
the inquiry rule. And so 90 days is your limit if somebody has just kind of orally said, you can call me.
Okay. All right. 90
If
days.
they say just orally, not even they can call me, they just check in with you. They shouldn't shoot you an email and say, hey, I'm interested in learning about,
All right.
what your insurance products.
Yeah. Where it gets flaky to me is where, it at certain levels of, we'll call it levels of life insurance sales, you have where you have more of a high volume, less quality of a sale, or less lucrative of a sale. I'm trying to be polite by describing this level of the life insurance sales, but it's a numbers game, right? So there's high volume of calls because there's also a high volume of rejection. Throwing it at the wall and see what sticks, and that's where the automated dialer comes in. So here's a scenario for you that I think is interesting: is those agents using automated dialers. It dials up, 20 people. What happens when 5 people answer? Like, do you know how the auto dialers work?
Yeah, well, you shouldn't be using any dialer that's got a 20-line assignment. You shouldn't be attempting 20 calls at once.
I know.
Abandonment is a terrible thing. If you're relying on age leads, abandonment is very risky for you, because now, let's say your system is not an ATDS, but as soon as you have an abandoned call, you have to play a pre-recorded message, right? That's what the CFR requires. And if you don't, then you just violated the TCPA. But if you do, and your consent's not valid, you just violated the TCPA, right? So the only way to avoid that catch-22 is not to have abandoned calls in the first place. So nobody should be out there with a 20-line dialer. That's crazy.
Okay. All right.
Now, if you've got, a 3-line dialer, I don't even like that, because you're going to still be dropping a bunch of calls. But,
That's right.
some people do it.
I'll get a phone call. The clock has already started. On second 11 and 12, it's hanging up on me. I've answered the call. There's no one there. And at 11:12, it hangs up. So what that indicates to me is that I'm on the receiving end of an auto dialer that someone else answered, so it abandoned me. I know a lot of agents that are doing that. They're using these auto dialers. What do I need to be screaming to agents when it comes to using these auto dialers and this abandonment?
Well, they've got a bunch of problems, right? Again, if you're using an auto dialer, then out of the gate, you're using age leads on an auto dialer. You're just asking for trouble on a straight 227B claim, right? Thou shalt not use an auto dialer without valid consent. Age leads many times are not valid. So just start there. That's a problem number 1.
Right.
Problem number 2 is I just told you, you can only abandon 3% of your calls on a campaign basis. So if you're doing 100 calls, 100 call attempts, and you're abandoning more than 3 of those, you're violating the law, right? And then 3, setting aside, even if you're only abandoning 1 call for every 100, you're not violating the abandonment rules. Again, you have to play that pre-recorded message. If you're not playing the pre-recorded message, that's a violation of the law. If you are playing the pre-recorded message, then again, 1, you're identifying yourself in a pre-recorded message, and if you don't have valid consent from that age lead, you're going to get sued for that pre-recorded message, right? So it's all bad news. It's all bad news.
Yeah, I don't like it.
And a brand new ruling just came out that folks should keep in mind, that is now requiring marketers, and everyone reaching out to make a sale here is going to constitute as a marketer. You've got to actually have your phone number and your name displayed, if the carrier allows you to do so, on the outbound, so the consumer can see who's calling them.
That's new. I didn't know about that one. I thought you were going into the revocation of the consent rule coming up, but we'll touch that later. That's another one, right? But to stay on this topic of this 3% abandonment and all this stuff, what is the rule there, and what does that sound like for the abandonment?
Yeah, so I don't have it memorized off the top of my head, but you have to say something like, this is, your name, calling for telemarketing purposes. I think you have to actually specifically say for telemarketing purposes. And then I want to say you have to include a callback number or a key punch feature to opt out. So, there's some requirements in there.
I didn't know that.
You got to take a look at those rules. Yeah, they're in this. It's in the Code of Federal Regulation in the 64-1200 section.
Okay, I'm curious now how this has never landed on my table in any way, because every agent that I can think of is unaware of that too, especially if it's news to me and I'm in this study. So agents are calling and they're getting abandonment. They need to have a pre-recorded message that plays in the event that someone doesn't answer, or if they answer but you have to abandon.
Yeah, if they answer within 2 seconds of them saying hello, within 2 seconds of their, quote, completed greeting, you either have to get on that phone and say hi, or you have to play a pre-recorded message.
Wow.
Do that.
That's new, and that's important. I need to get on that. If you're using auto dialer, you have to have an abandonment message. That's not going on. So here's the question: how is that enforceable? I know I asked you the same question in another format last time, but how are they getting caught?
What they're going to do is they're going to talk to you, right? Oh, hey, how are you, Paul? And you're going to do what you're going to do is you're going to try to sell them insurance. And they'll research and see, is this enough information for them to find you, or do they need even more information? And they'll come back to you. And these guys they're brazen, man. They'll just ask you, right? Oh, man, do you have like a business address? Is there some place where I can you're not like a fly-by-night. You have like a real building somewhere. I can go find you and locate you if I needed to, right? And they'll just ask you these questions, and you'll think you're going to get yourself a sale, and so you're being really helpful and providing all this information, and they're just using it to sue you. So that's generally how it goes. How
are agents going to get caught if there's nothing? The number's spoofed. There's no information on the agent.
Rules require.
What are the rules? Yeah.
The callers to disclose who they are. As I just told you, the caller ID has to be honest. It can't be spoofed, and it has to identify who's calling just on the caller ID. Then, if you're making marketing calls, you have to identify who you are as a marketer, right? That's also a requirement of the rules. You have to identify who you are. So all I'm going to say is this is the law, and hopefully people are abiding by the law. And if you're not, you're going to get caught. Don't think you're not. You're going to. I'm not going to tell people how to catch you.
That's right.
You're going to.
At some point, the consumer base will be pissed off enough that there's going to rise to the head. The good ones are going to get taken down with it almost, or at least get pulled in.
Yeah, that is the problem, right? Is you've got an ecosystem now where the good guys are already getting pulled in, right? You try to be a good telemarketer, a good insurance company that's actually just reaching out to somebody that wants a quote. You try to do that these days, right? And people will assume that you're a bad actor. People will assume that you're a scumbag, even if, literally somebody just went onto a reputable website, filled out a form, asked you to call them, and then you call them, right? Yeah. And somehow you're still going to be viewed as a bad guy because of all the bad guys that are out there. Yeah. But look, normally, the phone numbers come in and people will just stay on the line and go all the way through. Many times people will sign up for a product, Paul. They will literally get a policy just to find out, right, who was behind it. And they will sue the company, whoever it was. Let's say it's Allstate. I'll just pick on Allstate, right? And what they'll do is they will send a demand letter to Allstate and say, you're responsible for these phone calls. Well, Allstate's going to say, no, we're not. It's so-and-so that was responsible for the calls. Okay. And so then you go after so-and-so. And so-and-so says, it wasn't me, it was so-and-so, right? And so through that lens, by going after that top person, the carrier that actually wrote the policy, these guys can just go back and find step by step, like a trace back, right, who was responsible for the original calls. Okay. And that is often, not always, but often how it goes. And I'm always amused when people ask me, I know you didn't ask me this, but people ask me well, how are they going to catch me, right? Those are people that I'm never going to give you legal advice. I'm never going to represent you. You're a scumbag, right? If you're asking me how you're going to get caught, that means you're not trying to comply with the law. That means I have no interest in representing you. But I will tell you, you're going to get caught. Yeah, that is one of the ways that people catch you.
It's causing problems for the good guys. And, like I say, if I'm a carrier executive, I have to be worried now because there's a lot of bad actors out there and it's escalating, and the automated technologies are getting easier now to continue the bad behavior, we'll say. What I want to do now is, your Assurance IQ knowledge. I did a piece on that and I studied that a little bit. That's kind of the example I think people should go by. That one, as I learned this case, I said, man, this is exactly what Eric and I talked about. What's your take on the Assurance IQ case? I know that you weren't the representative for that settlement, but you had some prior experience with Assurance IQ, right?
Yeah, that's right. Assurance was my client. I represented them. We were successful in defending them in a different case.
Right.
And then Prudential came in, bought Assurance, wanted to switch counsel, use a different, in my opinion, maybe not as qualified law firm, just my opinion.
You get to say that.
And it went differently. And they ended up having to write a $20 million check. And beyond that, not only did they have to write a $20 million check, they went out of business. They were shut down like 2 months later. They entered into the settlement, and then they shut down. I mean, it's kind of weird, right? Like, why not shut down before you write the settlement check? Like, why pay the $20 million and then shut down? Which is very interesting. Very interesting. But that's how they did it.
Yeah, $2.35 billion acquisition in 2019. And then here we are, end of 2024. The doors are closing.
Yeah, 5.5 years. 5.5 years later, it's out of business.
Okay.
Crazy. I mean, you want to talk about wasting a couple $1 billion. I mean, not too many companies have just thrown $2 billion away.
That's right.
Prudential has.
Yeah, and Prudential, that's one of the largest carriers, right? And so that to me, that's a good example. From your take, what happened? What did Assurance IQ violate? What took them down?
When your business model is buying third-party leads and making a huge outbound attempt to, bring consumers into a marketplace to sell products, you better have a crystal clear process. And I think that the fact that they had to face all these TCPA cases and ultimately had to settle one for over $20 million, I think Prudential's looking at that company. I think the public records show that it never made a profit, right?
That's true.
And it's got to be asking itself, what are we doing, right? And so I think it was a very brave decision by whoever made the decision to shut it down. I mean, that takes, it takes bigger balls to shut something down than it does to go buy something, right? Like anyone can go and take a risk and go buy something, but to look at something and say, this isn't working, and I'm going to be brave enough to put a bunch of people out of work. I mean, and deal with the slings and arrows of losing an opportunity and the potential for the revenue in the future, and just make that decision and say this is what's right for Prudential. I mean, that's a pretty bold move that somebody had to make. I don't know who made it. I don't know who made that decision, but that's a pretty bold move. I guarantee you, they were looking at TCPA as part of that equation. No question about it.
I think so too. You're right. That's not an easy decision to make, but that tells me that there was operationally, it was not a good model. Because of the rulings, because of everything we talk about. This is, to my study, and this is publicly, posted, so this isn't, diving into any legal matter, but they were really blasting the AI, these AI calls, using AI to do the conversation. We know that's part of the rule. Pre-recorded messages, they were, basically having a lot of, putting in the auto dialers, people answer, the pre-recorded message begins, and then you go all the way back to Prudential, the big carrier. That's why I try to warn carriers. That's why a lot of my target audience is carriers. What the other part of where I wanted to get your take on is with the IMC and vacating the rule. The one-to-one consent, we've talked about this again and again, but why do you think the 11th Circuit Court, and I think they were selected because of their history with going after fighting, pushing back against regulators. That's my opinion, but I think the history says that the 11th Circuit Court is the one that they obviously petitioned. But my question is, the IMC, what do you think happened? Why was it so powerful that they got with their way?
it just got really lucky, to be honest with
Lucky?
you. I mean, I think this was a dog having its day. They got a panel of 3 Trump judges, including some of the stickiest sticklers, from a procedural standpoint. And look, this ruling that came down, these judges rushed this ruling to get it in time, right? It shouldn't, this ruling shouldn't even be out yet. It's March. It should be out in like April or May. They rushed to get it out in January, right? These guys had a very strong opinion in terms of what they were going to try to do. They were going to send a message to the FCC. They turned just completely the precedent on its head, right? This was judicial advocacy, right? These judges, and they didn't even follow the rules or the arguments that IMC made, right? These judges had an opinion, and they wanted to do things their way. And I'm going to tell you, it had very little to do, I think, with the IMC, very little to do with the TCPA, very little to do with one-to-one or lead gen. It had everything to do with the courts and what we see all around society right now, pushing back and trying to dismantle the agencies. And right now, that is the big push with the administration, is trying to limit the reach of government. Some could say dismantle the government, but really limit the government. And this IMC ruling was designed to do just that, right? TCPA, that was just kind of the backdrop. But really what this ruling was going after the FCC.
Okay, I missed that one. Here was my take.
Yeah.
Is you look at who would have been mostly impacted by the one-to-one ruling. And to me, it's if you're selling leads and you're a model, you have a high revenue model for selling age leads, okay? You're going to lose that in a day if that ruling goes to effect. So you can't resell leads, right?
That's true. Yeah.
All right, so who stands to lose there? And that's your big IMOs who sell leads, sell age leads specifically to their agents, right?
Yeah, sure.
That's a huge revenue loss. The age leads are important to these IMOs. They're recruiting agents. Yeah. They're buying agencies so that they can have more agents to sell age data to. I think some heads were turned for it.
Was there some kind of back channel discussions? I don't know. What I do know is I saw a very activist court that was much less focused on the impact of the ruling on IMOs or anybody else. Very little discussion about that. Much more focused on how are we going to limit agencies from making law, right? And that's really what it comes down to. Is this was a battle. This ruling was the court saying, we make the law, not you agencies, and really a big brushback at the FCC.
That's a good perspective, and that's one that I would not have had not you come on. But now I get it because it ties back to everything else we see.
Yes, that's right.
See,
this court, I believe, said, look, we're going to look at the big picture, and we're going to set aside any other considerations, and we're just going to say, I'm tired of these regulators doing wild stuff, and we're going to put a stop to it. And honestly, it wasn't even that wild what the FCC did, but it was enough that this court was not going to let them do it. Right. I mean, it's kind of as simple as that.
All right, so just to wrap up what I want to, I know this is reiteration, but that's what it requires. Agents and brokers, IMOs, carriers, lead sellers. How should I advise an agent in today's climate, in the current environment where we stand when it comes to age leads specifically, because that was what they asked for?
That's what we're talking about. Oh, look, I mean, none of this is legal advice. Get yourself a lawyer. That's step one. Get yourself a lawyer. Don't use pre-recorded calls, artificial voicemail, or artificial voice messages, AI. Don't use any of that on an age lead ever, right? If you're going to call an age lead, do it manually. Don't do ATDSs. Don't do auto dialers. Keep yourself safe. But if you want to do, auto dialers, those are safer than pre-recorded calls. Don't do pre-recorded calls, artificial calls, AI calls, artificial voicemails, pre-recorded voicemails, IVR, ringless voicemail. Don't do any of that stuff, right? Do text messaging, and if you want to use an auto dialer, again, there's risk there, but it's a lower risk because you're less likely to get sued. right? The safest thing is just to call manually on the aged leads, or don't buy aged leads, right? Get a different lead source. But I understand you have to. If you feel like you have to, then I would say pick up the phone and call these people, right? That's the better route. Or again, send them text messages. People like text messages. If you want to communicate with them, but again, you're going to want to do that manually as well. You don't want to be sending out 100,000 blast text messages. That's not going to go well for you.
Yeah, that's where it's going. By the way, that's where, because the software, there's automation built in where that you can text and keep the drip going, and you can do it to a very high volume. That you get a good database, a good spreadsheet of people, you can blast them all. And that's where it's going, and that's why I'm calling it now. I'm foreseeing the regulators coming back around because it's increasing, and it's not going to stop unless something happens, unfortunately, I think. So anyway, an IMO, an agency, particularly IMOs who have lots of agents beneath them, what kind of advice would I give them? Just simple advice.
Well, you've got to understand that you might feel like you aren't responsible for the action of the agents, but everybody in this chain is getting sued, and that's going to include you. So if you want to just feed your agents a bunch of bad aged leads and then think that they're going to get in trouble and you're not going to get in trouble, I think you're crazy. Everybody in this ecosystem now has to be paying very close attention to the TCPA. And then that's true for the carriers as well, right? Which is kind of the next level up. Everybody in the ecosystem, from the agent, everybody has to make sure that they are complying with the law and have a plan to comply with the law. Just saying, hey, look, we didn't make the phone calls, so neener. Now, if you touched it, you broke it, you bought it, right? I mean, look at Quote Wizard. I mean, those guys are getting crushed. They're getting crushed in this class action, and they're facing like tens of millions in exposure. So just be careful.
Got it. And you kind of rolled it in the carriers already. That was my next one I was going to. If I advise a carrier, I do often. Carrier executives and representatives. When it comes to TCPA, the same advice for the IMOs. Don't think you're excluded. And do you think a carrier is more or less the whale like before? Like you mentioned it last time, as you called them the big whale. They're targeted no matter what, it seems, because they are the whale.
Yeah, nothing has changed. The only thing I will say is that some of the plaintiffs' lawyers now will cut you a deal if you're the carrier and you didn't make the phone call, and you're willing to roll over on the guys who did make the phone calls. A lot of the plaintiffs' lawyers will let the carriers go now. Some of them want the whale, right? Some of them want that blubber, and they're going to take out their harpoon and go. But many now are just like, it's fine. I'll go after the smaller players and go get my piece.
Yeah.
And so, but the risk is enormous, right? I mean, the carrier's sitting there. They're the most visible one, right? As I told you earlier, they're the ones that write the policy. They're the ones that consumer is going to say, aha, all these phone calls I got, it was all Humana's fault, or it was all, whoever's fault.
Right.
And they're going to get sued in the first instance. And they're going to pass the buck down to the real callers, of course, but they're going to still get sued in the first instance many times.
The last one, and this is where it's fun for me, because I already talked about aged leads and the reselling. If you're a lead seller, are they still the least likely to get pulled in? What you told me last time was they can sell all they want. You're in trouble if you buy it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that continues to be the case. Now, if the lead seller is making calls, right, and then transferring, then the lead sellers put themselves right in the crosshairs. But if all they're doing is generating a lead form and then selling that data, and you are buying it and making your own phone calls, they're safe and you're not, right? Now, you want to have an indemnity agreement that says you, the lead seller, have to give me only valid express written consent leads, and if you don't, then you're liable for everything I'm liable for. But ultimately, they're not going to get sued, and the plaintiffs don't even have standing to sue them. You have to go after them on your indemnity claim. But the truth is, as messed up as it is, the TCPA doesn't apply to them. It applies to the caller and those who, on behalf of the call was made. And the lead generator is they're just selling you the bullets, right? Yeah. You're firing the gun. So they're not liable.
All right. That's where we are. Anything you think of that, guys? I'm tailoring this to the insurance community. Anything? I know you got experience in it, especially with the Assurance IQ that you represented before the takedown. I say that's not going to let you gloat, but I think you I think you have an interesting position how you represent them, and they change counsel and then they go down. But I'll let you smile on with that. That's pretty interesting. But yeah, anything into the insurance world.
The first time.
I know, right?
By the way,
yeah.
That, I represent a client and we win, and then they switch counsel because ownership changes, or I leave the firm and they don't come with me, and all of a sudden they start losing. I mean, it's funny the way that works. I think we did a good job today, Paul. Always good being with your audience, and I really appreciate you having me, man.
See you on another one in the future if something happens, but here we are up to now. Appreciate the update, buddy.
Yeah, talk soon.
See you next
Bye-bye.
time.